say, and without stress. We are starting the live stream. It's not on YouTube yet. I will say when we are online and I see us on YouTube. We are online.
Hello, everyone. Good morning for those who are far away from Ukraine, and good evening to those who are closer. My name is Alona Liasheva, and I'm editor of Commons Journal. And this year, as you know, we organized this huge event, conference, Dialogues of Peripheries, and now we're holding the final event, and we're going to speak about authoritarian regimes and the imperialist aggression. For those who are watching us on YouTube, you can also take part in the discussion by leaving your questions and comments in the chat. The same applies for those who are here with us on Zoom. We have a chat and you can put your questions here. Also, in the end, I might switch to Ukrainian. So if you want to hear the final word of the conference, you can choose the option of interpretation and choose English. Okay, let's start the panel. When we were planning this conference, the background idea of it was to bring together people from countries which experience one or the other sort of imperialist aggression. And during these 2 days, we actually shared a lot of experiences with people who probably are more similar to like experiences which are more similar to experiences of Ukrainians. But this panel is a bit different because with this panel, we decided to a bit take a step back, probably from all the pain and horror which happen now in our lives, and try to understand, but where all this came from, how certain regimes developed to a point when they do not only oppress citizens inside of the country, but also decide to start an invasion, occupy, destroy, organize ethnic cleansing, etc. And that's why we invited our amazing colleagues from who are experts on such countries as Russia, Iran, and Hungary, with whom we're gonna try to understand why such regimes occur, and probably in this event we're rather gonna think not about the war itself, but about the long-term origins of it. So yeah, let me introduce our speakers. So first of all, it's Ilya, who is a political theorist and activist. Frida, amazing Marxist with whom we already had interview on our journal. And Csaba, he is a journalist from Hungary who actively now writes on Ukraine and travels to Ukraine quite often. So yeah, let me not take a lot of your time, and Ilya, please start.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for the invitation. Actually, it was a bit surprising to be the first speaker. But I want to start my brief talk about the authoritarian or even neo-fascist dictatorship in Russia from the moment of the beginning of this of the invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, because I think that this moment was crucial for the transformation of the regime into new quality. And in this sense, I think what Alona already mentioned, this like interrelation between the external imperialist aggression and the formation of the of the authoritarian regime, of the dictatorship, is very much clear, it's very much visible. So it's hard to define in all the story of the formation of and development of the Putin regime. It's hard to distinct the let's say external and internal. So if we look back to the history of this regime, of its formation, starting from the early 2000s or even earlier, even in the in the 90s, we can see how the experience of the Chechen wars, of the first Chechen war and then the second Chechen war, which was started exactly in the moment when Putin came to power in the fall of 1999, how how important it was for the development of this political regime. So basically, if we look to this moment, to the moment of February of 2022, we can see how in a week, the first week of invasion, the political regime, which was previously designed more or less as some sort of managed democracy or electoral authoritarianism with some limited space for like freedom of expression. Let's say it was very restricted, but it existed to the last moment before the invasion. How all of that was crashed, and how this regime moved to the new quality, to the of the open dictatorship, where the identity between the let's say support or unconditional support of the war, unconditional support of the president, of like a charismatic leader of the nation, and the very kind of civic belonging to the Russians as a community, became like crucial for the construction of the regime. So you have to support Putin, support the war, and that could make you a true member of the community, a true member of the society. So up to to now, there are more than 600 political prisoners in Russia, like officially recognized. Probably there are much more, because starting from February 2022, people were arrested just because of their open disagreement with this sort of civic identity that I just described. So it means that people openly criticized the war. They distribute some sort of alternative information. So all of that was criminalized. All the independent media, mostly liberal independent media that remain to the moment when the war was started, were shut down, like during a week, and the quite strict censorship was implemented, and also some process of ideologization of the sphere of the culture and education was started. So up to now, we can say that in most of the education, you already have the sort of ideological courses. For example, in the universities, there is the course which called the DNA of Russia. So DNA of Russia means that there is something it's a kind of idea of identical between the biological, between some sort of unconscious and culture or history as the legacy of the Russians that they share. So it means that people should remember something that is already inherited in their DNA, and this means that basically you have the courses that introduce the state ideology in the universities. These courses, they're so you have to visit it. You have to be there. Also in the schools, there are also some kind of ideological brainwashing was started. So you see the transformation of the regime in a sort of the total state. The other question is what was the way towards it? So how it happened? As I mentioned already, in the whole history of the transformation of the Putin regime, the relation between the external and internal was always presented. So the aggression, the external aggression, the external military operations that brings some sort of unity for the society, that brings some peace and social harmony inside the country, this kind of relation became essential for the regime as such. And also, vice versa, every sort of internal opposition, any sort of social movements, any sort of challenges coming from below, coming from the society, were recognized as the intervention of the external enemies. So were immediately recognized as the external threats. So in this sense, you can see how the very clear and very coherent anti-revolutionary line became essential for this regime, which actually extrapolated to the history. So if you listen clearly to the speeches of Putin, you can find that this idea that the revolution was just and everywhere and in any form was a sort of intervention of external forces. So this kind of explanation used even to describe the events of the Russian Revolution of 1917, then to describe exactly in the same way the protests in Russia in 2011, 2012, the biggest protests against a regime that ever happened in its history, and of course the events in Ukraine in 2014. So in this sense, you can say that the invasion of Ukraine also was a way to prevent this kind of challenges for the regime from below in Russia. It was a part of this very coherent, very clear anti-revolutionary line, which lies in the very foundation of this regime. And the last question is what should be the name for this regime now, especially after its transformation into the open dictatorship after the beginning of invasion. There is a big debates about if we can name it fascism, if it right way to do it, and I think that yes, it's just naming. Of course, it's a new form of fascism, a new form of extreme repressive authoritarian state that has very little in common with the, let's say, historical fascisms in various European countries in the 30s. So this new fascism was born out of spirit of the neoliberal transformation of the society. It was born out of atomization of the society, the atomization which produced by the market, by the market economy, by sort of relations that it bring to society. And that's why you can't describe this new form of fascism in terms of mass mobilization. So, of course, it's not a regime which based on some sort of fascist movement. There is no fascist movement, there is no mobilization, but contrary, you have a deep depoliticization, the atmosphere of powerless and fear in the society, which create the base for this regime. And the last thing that I want to say it's that this kind of extreme form of neoliberal authoritarian capitalism that you have in Russia for now, it's not something unique. It's not something that came only out of some special path of post-Soviet Russia during last 20 or 30 years. But I think that it's it's an acceleration of neoliberal capitalism that came in Russia to some extreme form, but also presented in the both presented globally is some sort of tendency. So, and even if you look to the, let's say, this Putin's ideology, it's very eclectic, and it's very kind of secondary in the terms that it coined a lot from the rhetorics of the global far right, in the US and Europe and so on. So in this sense, the Putin's regime for the moment exists as the vanguard of some very dangerous global trend.
Ilya, thanks a lot. I do have, of course, a lot of questions, but we will have time for this in the discussion. I just wanted to highlight what you said about Russian regime being not something unique, because for us here now in Ukraine, of course, our enemy, like your enemy, always looks very special to you. That it's something that, you know, never happened. But if we take a bit like step back, the scariest part that it's not something super unique, and it might happen again, and it might happen in different regions as well. So that's why it's really good we are here today to talk about such tendencies which were probably present in Russia before, which led to the state in which we're now in different contexts. And I want to invite Frida. Of course, it's on one hand, if we, you know, look for people who look from more, I don't know, civilizational perspective, you know, Russia, Iran, different cultures. But here now in Ukraine, we see how, you know, different cultures might be connected in not very good way, of how Iran also became an ally in war against Ukraine. So Frida, floor is yours.
Thank you. And in order to save time, I did write out my comments, but then when we get to the Q&A, of course, I'll be more spontaneous. I will read from prepared comments. So first, about the evolution of the regime in Iran. The Iranian state needs to be understood as a case of militarized state capitalism, acting as a regional imperialist power in the Middle East. In many ways, it has continued the general direction of the economy of the previous Pahlavi regime, that is a statist economy characterized by the unity of industry and the army. Since the 1979 revolution, however, Ayatollah Khomeini and his followers, who established the Islamic Republic, have used an anti-US imperialist discourse to destroy any progressive and revolutionary opposition to their repression and to co-opt part of the Iranian and global left. And of course, when I say destroy, and I don't mean to ignore the uprisings that we've had in 2017, 2019, and the Women Life Freedom Movement that I will talk about later in my comments. The extent to which the Iranian regime is against US imperialism is directly related to its own capitalist and Persian Shia nationalist ambitions. Hence, its anti-imperialism is a counter-revolutionary one. After the Iran-Iraq War from 1980 to 1988, as long as oil income was plentiful, this regime spent a portion of its profits on building infrastructure, health, education, and giving benefits to a large part of the working class, so long as they abided by its fundamentalist ideology. However, over time, more and more of the oil income started going toward militarism and military and political interventions in other countries in the region at the expense of the extreme poverty of the masses. 80% of the Iranian economy, which consists mainly of oil and gas, telecommunications, and auto production, is under the control of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is Iran's de facto military and principal employer. It can be argued that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is Iran's de facto state. It is a force for repressing labor, youth, women, and oppressed minority struggles inside Iran. It also conducts Iran's military interventions in Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon, either directly or through its Afghan and Lebanese Hezbollah militias, which are funded by the Iranian state. In 2018, in a public speech, President Rouhani started at the time, who was president at the time, not at this point, he stated clearly that Iran's strategic borders are the Indian subcontinent on the east, the Caucasus in the north, the Red Sea in the south, and the Mediterranean in the west. Hence, although Iran is an authoritarian Islamic fundamentalist theocracy pursuing a Shia expansionism, its military interventions in the region have been based both on theocratic adventurism and ambitious and delusional goals concerning future economic benefits. Now, as far as the political economic structures that support this regime are concerned and how they're integrated into the global economy, up until the 2018 withdrawal of the US Trump administration from the nuclear agreement with Iran and the imposition of severe sanctions, which have destroyed its economy, Iran had the second largest economy in the Middle East after Turkey. It thus saw itself as a contender against Saudi Arabia for control over the region. The Iranian regime still hopes that through a reliance on China and Russia, it will be able to pull itself out of the current crisis and continue to compete as a regional superpower. As an inefficient, and I want to emphasize inefficient, militarized, theocratic, state capitalist regime in which over 80% of the capital is owned and managed by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps or its contractors, the regime is held to account by no one. Even from a capitalist standpoint, it has been spending an increasing portion of its oil income on militarist projects that have not yet generated a profit, except most recently with its sales of drones and missiles to Russia for use in its genocidal war in Ukraine. That is generating profit for the Iranian regime, unfortunately. Of the funds acquired through the sale of oil, gas, and petrochemicals, what does not go into militarist projects is embezzled by the government leaders and their cronies. This leads to a great deal of corruption within the system itself. Thus, Iranians suffer from severe levels of inequality, malnutrition, and more than 60% of the population of 82 million live under the poverty line. 90% of Iran's 13 million workers are contract workers with few rights and benefits. While the official workforce is estimated at 28 million, millions work unofficially without any rights, including millions of women who are not part of the official workforce, but the underground or unofficial workforce. The real unemployment rate is much more than 60%. The current minimum wage is $100 per month for a family of 4, which is less every day due to rising inflation, and is far below the World Bank's extreme poverty line of $240 a month for a family of 4 or $2 per person per day. So it's far below that. The Iranian government has been trying to find new ways to rebuild its economy through alliances with China and Russia. China's One Belt, One Road initiative seeks to offer Iran a way to circumvent US sanctions. An agreement signed in the fall of 2019 based on this project was to provide Iran with a $400 billion investment in oil, gas, and other infrastructure development, and 5,000 Chinese security forces to be deployed as security guards in exchange for Iranian oil, gas, and petrochemicals at a 30% discount. And Chinese security forces really means Chinese soldiers on Iranian territory. Both parties committed to the deal for 25 years with a boost in Chinese investments every 5 years. Iran is now also part of the expanded BRICS, the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa economic agreement and alliance that has now added 8 more members since earlier this fall, or I'm sorry, the late summer. For decades, the regime has been using Iranian nationalism to promote its militarist interventions and programs as a source of honor and strength. This can help explain why up until 2017, when there was an uprising, most Iranians were quiet about Iran's military interventions and its nuclear and missile programs. Now, however, given the dire economic situation in the country, the brutal repression of the 2017 and 2019 protests and the 2022 Women Life Freedom Movement, and the experience of the COVID-19 pandemic, which was deadly for Iranians and killed many, the numbers were not even counted. After all of this, most Iranians have realized that they're being robbed to pay for wars, arms, and dangerous nuclear and missile programs that have brought the country to the point of economic collapse. They're also feeling more sympathy for the people of the region and Ukrainians who have suffered from Iran's military and political interventions. Now, concerning authoritarian regimes and wars and why they are interconnected. One. It can be argued that capitalism in its essence is authoritarian. If we begin with Karl Marx's Capital and his economic and philosophical manuscripts of 1844, we learn that capitalism is not simply an unjust mode of distribution. It is a mode of production based on alienated labor, an extreme mental and manual division of labor that turns work into a meaningless, undifferentiated, monotonous activity and turns the human being into a cog in a machine. Capitalist labor alienates us not only from the products of our labor, but also from our potential for free and conscious activity and from other human beings. Based on Marx's Capital, we can sum up the logic of capital in the following way: that alienated labor, which is not limited to factory or manufacturing labor, produces value and leads to a system in which the goal becomes the expansion of value as an end in itself. To meet this goal, capitalism introduces more and more machinery and technology to increase labor productivity and extract more and more surplus value from human or living labor. This process also leads to the concentration and centralization of capital in fewer hands, to the point where in a single country, capital could even be accumulated in the hands of a single capitalist or a single capitalist corporation. At the same time, this process leads to an imbalance for capitalism itself. Relatively more and more technology and machines are used at the expense of living human labor, which is the only source of value. This imbalance leads both to an increasing rate of unemployment relative to investment and a tendency toward a decline in the rate of profit and periodic economic crises. And these crises can lead to war between competing capitalist entities or states. So right there, you have the connection between the capitalist mode of production and war, global competition and war. Even without an outright war, in order to overcome crises, capitalism needs to resort to more and more authoritarian means, physically and ideologically, to extract more surplus value from labor and to quell the dissatisfied unemployed. These means can be seen in the use of slave labor, a prison industrial complex, more policing, and in general, greater militarization of society in life and in thought. However, there is more to why capitalism leads to authoritarianism. The logic of capital also promotes authoritarianism by devaluing critical and independent thinking and encouraging narrow self-interest and selfishness. So these are all the reasons that I wanted to single out about the connection between capitalism, accumulation, alienation, global competition, war. And of course, I mean, from Marx's standpoint, Marx thought that by bringing workers together, capitalism would create the conditions for national and international solidarity among them to uproot the system and to replace it with a humanist alternative. At the same time, he was not an unrealistic person. He realized, as a Hegelian dialectical philosopher, that reality develops in contradictory ways, and not everything is predictable, and that not everything fits into a pattern, that capitalism can be very resilient, and that racism, sexism, intra-class divisions, and ideological conditioning are also used to divide the working class and all those who suffer from the ills of capitalism. So do I have 5 minutes left?
3.
3 minutes, okay, there you go. So final 2 questions on the oppressed people and nations inside the regime and those suffering from the imperialist aggression of the regime. What are the perspectives for solidarity and what are the obstacles? So the modern Iranian state has a hostile relationship with provinces in which national minorities, the Kurds, Arabs, and Baluchis and Turkmens have been subjected to much discrimination and oppression and deprived of basic resources. Iran's national minorities are not allowed to use their mother tongue as the language of instruction and administration, and most suffer from poverty and state repression. And the regime is deeply afraid of the struggles for self-determination in Iranian Kurdistan in particular. And especially when you consider that the Women Life Freedom Uprising, which emerged in September 2022 against the police murder of a young Kurdish woman, Mahsa Jina Amini, started with large protests in Kurdistan and then continued to mass strikes among Kurds and strikes elsewhere as well. There's also a concern that the regime has about protests in Khuzestan against ethnic repression and against repression of Khuzestanis as an ethnic minority, and against the environmental, deep environmental problems of pollution caused by, and pollution, and in general, structural environmental problems caused by the building of dams and the pollution generated by the petrochemical industry. And there are concerns about Baluchistan, which is Iran's poorest province and has been the site of continuous protests since the Women Life Freedom movement began. And Baluch women have been issuing powerful feminist statements and challenging the Baluch leadership for being misogynist and having occasionally made deals with the Iranian regime and with the Taliban. And then finally, question about whether authoritarian regimes have Achilles heels and where. Yes, and these include economic bankruptcy and labor struggles, environmental disasters, opposition from women and non-binary people against misogyny and gender state violence, and opposition from oppressed national and ethnic minorities. The actions of Iranian women and the statements they have issued during the Women Life Freedom Movement last year showed that there's much that people around the world can learn from the current women's struggles in Iran. While Iranian women have not yet succeeded in creating a feminist revolution, they have posed some critical questions and challenges for global feminism. And in the Q&A, I'd be happy to say more about what I mean by that and the questions and challenges that the Women Life Freedom Movement raised. Thank you, and I'll stop for now.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being so structured and like so. I'm inviting our last speaker. Probably Hungary is a bit of a different case because thanks. Thanks, I don't know to whom, Zakarpattia is still a peaceful, relatively peaceful region. But we, especially recently here from the Ukrainian perspective, we noticed how Hungarian regime is changing month by month and getting more and more tendencies, which, okay, on one hand, we see how damaging they are for Ukraine, because Hungary is one of those countries who is not eager to support Ukrainian resistance. At the same time, we would like to know more about what goes on inside the country and how is it connected to global tendencies. So, Csaba, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ilona. So, well, as you know, and you also pointed out, like Hungary is a small country in Eastern Europe, actually, as you also pointed out, bordering Ukraine from the West. And it is totally different to such a large and powerful geopolitical players like Russia or Iran. Also, at this point, I'd say Hungary cannot be called authoritarian regime. At this point, the terminology is usually could be either flawed democracy or a hybrid regime. So let's just go through how the current regime in Hungary evolved, and Viktor Orban gave birth to this system that is currently running Hungary. So Orban and his Fidesz party has been in power now for almost 14 years, but they also won an election back in 1998 as well. Regarding its evolution, well, that's a long story. I try to explain as quickly as possible. During his high school years, Orban was a secretary of the local communist youth organization, but he wasn't a communist. He wanted to be in politics from a very early age. Later, Orban studied law in Budapest and political science in Oxford, which is an interesting case because this was funded by his current main international adversary, George Soros, Hungarian-American billionaire, head of the Open Society Foundation. So in 1988, he founded his current political party, Fidesz, which is the name acronym of Alliance of Young Democrats. Then later he was part of the roundtable discussions that prepared the system, or let's say regime change in Hungary, as it was very, very clear at that time that the Soviet Union under Gorbachev was not a real threat anymore in anywhere, basically in Eastern Europe or the former Eastern Bloc. Nevertheless, the system within was still quite repressive, but let's say like Orban read the events very, very well, and his movement at that time, later what became a political party, Fidesz, had a more radical, liberal approach to politics than any other liberal movement or party at the time in Hungary. Fidesz called for, still within the socialist regime, if we can call it socialist by any means, but that's what the system was called at the time. So they called for the rule of law, parliamentary democracy, anti-corruption, cultural diversity, which might sound like a joke today if we think about what they've been doing in the last almost 14 years. So moving on, getting closer to the end of the 80s, in the summer of 1989, he gave a speech during the reburial of the martyrs of the anti-Soviet revolution, where he asked for free elections and the withdrawal of Soviet troops from Hungary, which got him into mainstream politics domestically and internationally as well. And thanks to this speech, he managed to get into the first democratically elected parliament in 1990. His party got 9% of the votes. The first democratically elected right-wing conservative government in just few years basically became extremely unpopular because of its neoliberal economics that meant privatization, high unemployment, high inflation, that sent the governing MDF party basically into disarray. And Orban just once again read what's happening very well as early as in 1993. So he saw that the governing right wing is destroying itself with its policies that started to create a vacuum on the right wing. At the same time, his party became part of the Liberal International, where Orban actually was vice president until 2000. But even before that, after the second elections in 1994, Fidesz, Orban's party, barely reached 5% threshold. And it was clear that they are the smaller liberal party to another one, SDS. So it was time for Orban and his party to move on. So he started to transform his liberal student group into a central right-wing political party, which, as you can imagine, caused a really serious rift and a severe split in the party's membership. But nevertheless, Orban believed in it and started to fill this vacuum on the right. And he did so well that he actually won the elections in 1998. So at that time, Orban's communication was quite blunt, let's say, or boring. He always called anyone opposing him a communist or almost like a Russian agent, and basically that was it. And nothing really happened during those years. I'm going to explain later the NATO membership. Hungary was on the way becoming the member of the EU as well. But he lost the next elections 4 years later. And everybody thought Viktor Orban and his party, or at least Viktor Orban, he was done. But the next two terms under socialist government in Hungary, which adopted more and more neoliberal economic approach, and later, when in 2008 the financial crisis started, it was very much clear already that Viktor Orban is coming back. And then, obviously, he won the elections in 2010, and he grabbed the power, and he won't release it anytime soon. So with 2/3 of majority that he won with, he changed the playing field completely. He adopted a brand new constitution, changed the judicial and electoral systems, made the public media basically a propaganda tool that never questions anything they do. essentially making Hungary a so-called flawed democracy, as I mentioned earlier, or a hybrid regime. That's more like the academia terminology for Hungary nowadays. Orban actually himself calls his system as a liberal democracy. He is absolutely against the project of the United States of Europe. He always mentioning that he prefers sovereignty within the EU. Now the regime has the following main enemies that they are always talking about: migration, bureaucrats in Brussels, George Soros, and all other NGOs that actually wants to hear about human rights situations and, you know, anti-corruption movements. And they are, or he's basically put everything that I just mentioned into one bracket, and that's liberalism. So this is what he is building here. Regarding the economy structure of Hungary nowadays, so as you probably know, we are a member of the European Union. Fidesz and Hungary now has a corporate-friendly capitalist system, which over time started to favor domestic corporations, which could seem to be a positive thing coming from the left, obviously, and for some level, let's say it actually is. The problem is, however, that the extreme level of corruption in Hungary that is basically taking place, essentially, just to give you an example, Viktor Orban's best friend, Lőrinc Mészáros, a gas fitter from his local village, Felcsút, in just few years became Hungary's top oligarch and the richest person in the country. Basically, he bought banks and created one big from them, buying up lands everywhere, media organizations, football teams, even outside of Hungary, energy, IT companies. And most interesting part is that basically most of the EU fundings were landing in his pockets, as his corporations are usually winning all these projects domestically. Hungary on the international economic level is very much connected to Germany. That is the main reason that the EU has been complaining for years, but actually never did anything to stop Hungary's political moves. Some heads of the German corporations were actually bragging on European level that they can even call the Hungarian foreign minister during the night time. If they want something, he's going to pick up the phone, listen, and do what they want. Just to give you an example, BMW, this huge automotive corporation, just a few years ago, requested a new law from the government to raise the maximum overtime hours almost to double in a year, which became known as a slavery law here. But other German corporations aren't much better anyway. So we have like Audi, Mercedes, Volkswagen, Bosch, Siemens, you name it, are making incredible profits in Hungary due to its cheap and skilled labor, flexible labor laws, not flexible for employees though. And the vast amount of profit is basically just transferred out from the country very, very easily and without any restrictions. So, you know, that's why it's not a big problem for Orban that basically these corporations are taking out everything that they are creating, all the wealth that they are creating in Hungary, because he's got enormous political support in exchange. And this clearly shows that apparently the European Union itself is much more interested in satisfying its corporate elites than its workers or citizens. the EU Parliament, which highlights Orban's autocratic moves, is basically a toothless lion without any authority. In the last few years, however, it was, all the moves that the government was doing was even too much for the EU. And, it started to take some actions, withholding its funds to Hungary until it reverses the changes they did in so many fields. In the last few years, regarding wars, and, it's a difficult case also, but let's just put into geopolitical context what Hungary has been doing in the last few years. So in 1999, under the first Orban government, Hungary joined NATO, and we actively helped the alliance to bomb Yugoslavia at that time. But that didn't make him too popular. He also sent troops to Afghanistan in 2001, which lasted for 20 years, and it was extremely costly for Hungary's economy. And at the end of the day, as you also probably know, it turned out to be totally pointless. In the 2000s, Orban was still very much anti-Russia, and he never felt safe from the East. At least that was he was talking about all the time. So in 2008, that was a turning point. Russia attacked Georgia, and Orban was very critical and even furious, and wanted NATO to invite Georgia and Ukraine immediately into NATO because, as he pointed out, Russia just won't stop. And in this case, he was absolutely right. So in 2014, he called the invasion of Crimea an aggression, and once again asked the EU to give Russia a strong response. Then what happened after 2014? To make Hungary basically do an 80 degrees turn. So as I explained earlier, Hungary follows Germany closely. Whatever Germany does, Orban follows. Orban thought that the economic sanctions against Russia were a joke, and the EU is not serious about helping Ukraine, especially, you remember, when the Minsk II agreement came into effect. Orban thought, like, okay, now we can do whatever we want. We are just talking about putting some sanctions into effect, but that just basically won't stop Russia anyway. And there is actually a theory that he wanted to get close to Russia to build a relationship that would prevent Russian aggression against Hungary in the future, because at that time everybody was talking about like the Russian aggression against Georgia a few years ago, then in Ukraine, and maybe he wants to rebuild the empire from the Baltic states to the former Eastern Bloc countries also. So later on, he agreed on big infrastructure deals with Russia, most notably the expansion of the Paks nuclear power plant here in Hungary. In the meantime, the EU has been complaining that Hungary started to move away from European values and being more autocratic. And Orban thought, like, okay, we need to be more independent, open economic and political channels to the East as well. And he sped up his government's Eastern opening policy. The more connections, more business deals, more engagement brought new ideas, new strategies for Orban, who was still heavily criticized from the West, that basically got him very close to Russia and China. And even though he built his political career, as I explained, on anti-Russian and anti-communist sentiment. So this shows that he's extremely flexible on many, many levels, domestically and internationally as well. So he exploited the 2015's refugee crisis also very well. He started to put himself into his self-described savior of Christian Europe, which was too much for the EU, especially to the liberal Western EU countries. But that actually, and unfortunately, pushed him more and more to the east. So as he grew closer to Putin, he started to complain more and more about the Hungarian minorities situation in Ukraine, most notably the language law, which made Ukrainian language as almost like unique in all levels or fields, except obviously like, personal conversations or religious events. But a year after Russia invaded Crimea, and through its proxies, they started this separatist war in Ukraine. Not so long later, so just 1 year later, German, Dutch, Austrian companies made a big deal with Russia and Gazprom to build the new pipeline connecting Nord Stream 2, connecting Germany and Russia with cheaper and faster and quicker gas coming into Europe. So
I'm sorry, like 1 minute.
Oh yeah, sorry. Okay, so I still have like two main topics. So let's just start with, or let's just finish it with the last one, because I think that's the most interesting part, if there is any Achilles heel and where. So, as I said, it's a hybrid regime. In Hungary, the big problem is that the opposition is fragmented. They are out of the public media. And basically, they are getting into parliament without doing anything because Orban's party is winning by 2/3 majority anyway. So, that's a good paying job at the end of the day. So don't really have too much for that. What we would need, I think, from leftist perspective, I think there's supposed to be some grassroots movement coming from underground, basically. Educate the workers, students, and trying to figure it out. Like, there's supposed to be much more criticism, just that Orban is a corrupt or a friend of dictators, and there's supposed to be a movement which is built talking to the workers and everybody else on the political spectrum, because Hungary could be a wealthy country, but it's not a wealthy country because, the very few takes so much amount of wealth from the 99%. And, all grassroots movements should focus on this to change the scene, the political scene in Hungary.
So thanks a lot for your presentations, and we're already getting questions in the chat, so that's why I wanted to save more time for the discussion. And please, we have like 20 minutes for questions, so dear listeners, please just type your questions in the chat and I will read them. And the first question is for Frida. It's about the minorities. So Kirill asks, besides the Kurdish minority, what other ethnic groups are involved in the national democratic movement in Iran? And I will also read other questions and then ask my question, and then we are going to have a round. So the second question goes to Ilya, a very interesting one. So there is a lot of talk about the potential of national minorities liberation movements in Russia. My impression, Oksana says, and I agree with her, that is that most of these talks can be categorized as wishful thinking. What is your opinion on this question? Are there regions where such movements can get some scale and can or cannot display a role in fall of the regime? If cannot, then what can play. And yeah, we unfortunately are in a situation where we need to be realistic when thinking about it, because of course from our point of view it seems that the only actor which can oppose the regime are armed forces of Ukraine, but is there still a hope for other actors? And I wanted also to ask Csaba about, probably you could develop more on how the civil society in Hungary works, because okay, on the news we read how horrible is Orban regime. At least Ukrainian news, they really love to criticize Orban regime. Finally, they started doing it, because like before there was no, criticism to all of this right-wing parties winning in Eastern Europe. But if we talk about civil society, I don't know, about students, about people who live in bigger cities, is there a difference in opinions? And also probably we could, also try to somehow understand Hungary, comparing it to Russia and Iran, because Russia is an example of the regime where there is almost zero protest. And if there is a protest, it does not really work. There is no like actor which opposes the regime. In Iran, we have a completely different situation, where the revolution, every several years, it rises up, and we see how the movement, not taking into even that there such horrible oppression of it, it still goes on. So where could we place Hungary on this, I would say, scale, or probably it's completely out of the scale? So yeah, please, I think first Frida, then Ilya, then Csaba.
Sure. So in addition to the Kurdish struggle, which I mentioned, which is the most significant, and that's where we had the beginning of the Woman Life Freedom Movement, with protests against the murder of Jina Mahsa Amini for not wearing her hijab properly. There have been continued struggles in Khuzestan, which is in the southwest, bordering Iraq, and in Baluchistan, which is in the southeast, near Pakistan and Afghanistan. And both of those provinces, both Baluchistan and Khuzestan, are extremely poor. Baluchistan is the poorest, and what was really significant, we had seen protests in Khuzestan over labor issues, over, as I mentioned, pollution, opposition to pollution, and building of dams, which had also led to water shortage and other changes in the environment. But in Khuzestan, what was really surprising in a very progressive way was that with the rise of the Woman Life Freedom Movement, we saw the emergence of a feminist struggle in Khuzestan, or at least the feminist voice in Khuzestan, issuing statements, making clearly feminist demands, and challenging the leadership and challenging misogyny in Iranian society as a whole and within Baluchistan. So those are all really very promising, and I won't say much more because we don't have time.
Yeah,
thank you. So the first thing to say is that during all the years of Putin's regime, there was the process of defederalization of the country, which means not only limitation of power on the regions, and especially in the so-called republics, the regions where the various national minorities lived in Russia, but also this defederalization process means the systematic suppression of all sorts of regional national movements. So that's why you can say that there is any in any national region of Russia, you have some strong tradition of the national movement. But that doesn't mean that there are no any sort of anti-Moscow, anti-centralist, or even anti-Russian sentiments in some of these regions, especially after the beginning of the invasion of Ukraine. And you know that the national minorities from some of these regions, they were presented in the front line a lot, and there are a lot of people who were in the army from these regions died already, and of course it provokes some sort of feelings, some sort of sentiments, especially because this war is mostly designed as the war for the Great Russia, is the war for the Russian world, and sometimes, of course, it's not clear why the people who are not Russians should fight for the Russian world. But you can say that you have these sentiments and these feelings exist in some form of the organized movement. But I think that we should look at this question in a more broad framework, because generally speaking, the Russian regime is fragile in many ways. And the so-called mutiny of Wagner, of Wagner Group this summer is a good example of this fragility. And I think that, let's say, realistically, the possible crisis or possible fall of this regime will come as the sort of activation of the various contradictions that exist inside this regime. So I think that probably it could be some conflict on the top, some sort of split in the elites that will activate many other contradictions in the Russian society, such as a huge social inequality, and of course the situation with the national minorities. There is another question for me.
Yeah. Please go on, and then.
Do you think there is a chance of countrywide grassroots solidarity sparked by the minority movements within Russia? So it's very hard to predict how it will look like, because, for example, I don't know if you follow the Russian news. There was the kind of massive anti-Semitic action in Republic of Dagestan, in the North Caucasus, where some around 2,000 people they blocked the airport in Makhachkala, in the capital of this region, and they were searching for Jews to lynch them. So that was the main program of this movement. And this movement was mostly organized by the Telegram channel with very strange kind of origins. But this Telegram channel, which is called Morning of Dagestan, is Islamist channel, so they use the kind of Islamic slogans, and their anti-Semitism was designed in the sort of jihadist war against the enemies. But the interesting thing was that this action was probably the biggest grassroots movement in Russia during the past year. And what is interesting that if you look carefully to the propaganda of this morning of Dagestan, you can see how the anti-Semitic rhetorics somehow includes the elements of the anti-Russian rhetorics as well. So basically, I feel that in this region, in the northern Caucasus, the kind of realistic possibility of some sort of grassroots movement can go in this way, especially in the situation where the, let's say, radical Islamist tradition is the only kind of tradition of self-organization, of like political expression that still exist in this region and somehow rooted in some parts of the society there. So that's why for the moment I don't see the ground for the countrywide grassroots solidarity, but of course I wish it could happen someday.
Double, please.
Yes, so I tried to remember all the questions that were put into one or two sentences. So regarding civil society, and the system is basically, in that point of view, could be easily changed, like the elections are free. The problem is the level of propaganda and the fragmentation of the opposition that I already mentioned. But the civil society is mostly free to do whatever they want to do, but they are also very much disorganized. So, for example, in the last few months, there has been quite large protests, mostly coming from the teachers' associations, because, teachers, especially teachers, are the most underpaid, employees of the state. So basically they are living off usually 400 or 500 euros a month, which basically wouldn't be enough to survive here in the capital city, just to pay rent, to say the least. So there are some protests. Civil society also can take part of it. Problem is, however, so the government and its tools, the media tools, the propaganda tools, they are always single out the organizers of the protesters, that they are find something in the background what they did, like, I don't know, 20 years ago, and they are keep, trying to inject these, unrelated informations to their voters' minds. So basically, that's how they are killing off any kind of movement coming from grassroots. The other problem also, that the opposition, which has no credibility whatsoever, always jumps on these protests, and they are going around and showing their party flags and whatsoever. So the government is basically also do the same, mixing up the two, like, look, the protesters are communists. That's what they are actually trying to convey as a message to their voters. So eventually everybody is going to be like, okay, let's just screw this. We don't want to do this anymore, because what's the point? So you can do things freely, but you are just against a huge machine that never sleeps, and it's always against you. So that's why I think it's, at the end of the day, it's very much demoralizing for anybody who wants to do something larger coming from civil society. Regarding the bigger cities that you've been asked about, so for example, Budapest, the capital city, is in opposition hands. So the mayor and most of the districts are also in opposition hands. So you can in terms of Ukraine, can see much more solidarity sometimes. So, there were like streets close to the Danube renamed for Kyiv just recently. And you can see graffitis about Slava Ukraini even close to my, street where I live now. I just saw it a couple of days ago. So there are some artist movements which brought the issue of Ukraine also. I just went to a restaurant a couple of days ago and it was, fuck the war and, Russians out and stuff like that, written in Russian also. So, there is absolutely different approaches coming from a bigger city, obviously, where the majority lives actually. But it's the government and how it's built. And in that sense, it's very much different, Hungary, very much different than to Russia, to Iran. But in terms of, executive level, like what you have President Putin in Russia or Khamenei Ayatollah in Iran, at the end of the day, they are making all the big decisions. And this is the case also for Hungary. So even though we have civil society to do whatever they want, we have free elections, but still, whatever a bigger question comes into the picture, Orban is going to execute the last. He has the last words, basically. So in terms, could be looked at very similarly.
Yeah, and could you ask the question you wrote in the chat yourself, so I do not read your words?
Oh yeah.
And then...
So I wanted to ask Frida first about Iran, because you said like extreme economic situation could destabilize Iran from within. I mean, like that could be also part of the end of the regime in Iran. But Iran is under the heaviest economic sanctions since 1979. So what is that level that you can imagine that could be actually deadly for the Iranian regime?
Thank you. Do you want me to answer now?
Yeah.
So that was one of the factors. I certainly didn't mean that would be the only factor. And I mean, we have had extreme economic hardships of the masses since 2018. So that by itself will not do it. But I meant that when taken into consideration along with issues of environmental degradation and opposition to misogyny and discrimination against national minorities. But most important, I think, about Iran is that we have had some really progressive movements. We have had the demands of the women life freedom movement have been extremely progressive and very internationalist. And they've also received support from labor struggles, from the national minorities. They've included the demand for the recognition of LGBTQ community, which is for the Middle East is really amazing. And also for abortion and reproductive rights. So that is what I see as the hope for Iran, that those struggles will survive and continue. But economic crisis by itself will not do it. I mean, the best example is North Korea. I don't think you can get any worse than North Korea. And yet the Kim Jong-il regime is still in power. So.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Oksana has another question for Csaba, but I think she did not write it. Okay, so another question about Hungary. Some scholars talk about churchification of Hungary. So more churches. I don't know if I read the word in the right way, like churchification. Mm-hmm. What does it mean in terms of political trajectory, like the religious aspect?
Yes. So there is a really interesting story just from last summer when Orban was actually talking about Antonio Gramsci, the founder of the Communist Party of Italy, and about the creating a cultural hegemony or hegemony. I'm not sure how to pronounce this word correctly. And this is creating churches, talking about Christian values became part of that. So it started to overtake the discourse in Hungary. Obviously, especially in big cities, this creates rejection from people who has access to information. But in the countryside, it became basically the only thing to do for many communities, I would say, to go to the church. Churches are not being built that much as stadiums. That's Orban's favorite thing to do anyway. But the general consensus, especially in the countryside and for older generation, is basically the lack of access to information, the lack of access to any social life. The church is the only thing where people could go because there is basically nothing. It's the whole countryside, especially around the Ukrainian border. It is deserted. Old people living in, the young people move to bigger cities. There is basically nothing else. And that's why, people need some kind of, utopias like religion itself. So, the whole religious approach is being reinvented in Hungary. And, that's, obviously not could be part of the progressive movements, unfortunately. But that's the case. Like, it's part of the plan to create this cultural environment where Christian religion, traditional values is just part of the big picture. And if the public discourse comes into this environment, obviously people are not going to talk about anything else because it's just going to be a closed environment. And not to mention also religious leaders are usually very close to Orban's party. So basically it's not a rare case, especially before elections, that priests are actually talking about that you have to go to vote and vote for the current government, otherwise it's not going to be good for religious rights, which is absolutely unfounded claims, but still works somehow, especially if you consider that they control the mass media anyway.
Yeah, we have more detailed question from Oksana, but unfortunately, Oksana, let's discuss it probably another time with Chaba. Anyway, we are in touch because, it's time to wrap up, and I want to thank you, Ilya, Frida, Chaba, for your participation. Thanks for waking up so early. And also, Chaba, thanks for being here. It's evening. We will have an article on our website about our meeting. Also, the video will be on YouTube, both in English and in Ukrainian. In English, I think it's going to be like from now on, but in Ukrainian, we will upload it later. And now I'm going to switch to Ukrainian to say the final thank you. Дорогі друзі, подруги, дякуємо, що були з нами ці 2 дуже інтенсивних дні. Нам вдалося провести ці прекрасні 6 зустрічей, поговорити, познайомитись. Та дякую, що продовжуєте бути зі спільним. Цей рік для нас, як для багатьох в Україні, був дуже складним, але ми продовжуємо. Нагадаю, що крім статей на нашому сайті є подкасти, на нашому YouTube-каналі є відео. Будь ласка, продовжуйте слідкувати за нами. Так, і наостанок хочу подякувати, крім спікерів і спікерок, дуже хочу подякувати організаторкам, моїм колегам, перекладачам. Окремо дякую. Це було неймовірно. Ви зробили дуже складну роботу і дуже добре. І всім, хто долучився, до нових зустрічей на